Let's move on to the next game on Saturday. Saturday night, the Washington Commanders versus the Detroit Lions. Detroit coming in was a 9.5 point favorite, and my God, the Washington Commanders, for the first time since 1991, they advanced to the NFC Championship game. Jaden Daniels, what more can you say? 22 of 31, 299 yards, two touchdown passes, a QBR of 91.8, a passer rating of 122.9. You look at the running game, you've mentioned before Brian Robinson Jr., 15 carries, 77 yards, two touchdowns. Austin Eckler, 6 carries for 47 yards. Washington, 182 yards rushing, averaging 4.3 yards per carry. Terry McLaurin, 4 catches, 87 yards, including the 58-yard touchdown. My God. And also, champ, Washington's defense, 5 turnovers. That's how many turnovers that the Washington's defense accumulated in Saturday's game against Detroit. I will give you credit because you have called Washington. You said you wouldn't be surprised if they went to the NFC Championship game, and I'm shocked because again, I am a Commanders fan, right? And love this franchise, love this organization. I'm telling you, man, this is only the beginning because again, this is not the previous ownership with Dan Snyder. We're in a different direction now with Josh Harris and Magic Johnson. Very ecstatic to see what with them there. It was great to see Kevin Durant post game celebrating with the guys. Washington have really impressed me, man. I am totally astounded with how the way they won that game. I mean, Jaden Daniels, and I agree with Damian Woody. Based on the play so far in the postseason, he has looked like the best quarterback in the playoffs. And I don't think anyone could argue or dispute that because for a rookie under these types of circumstances to play this well has been magnificent. Now, unfortunately for Washington, they did lose Sam Cosmi, their best offensive lineman. He's out for the NFC Championship game due to a torn ACL. I am concerned about that, champ, because as you often said, quarterback can't throw behind his back. But for Philly, and we'll talk about Philly later on, it ain't going to be easy for them going up against Washington. And even though, and we'll discuss our picks on Friday night on the Sports PSP pod, I think this is going to be a very entertaining and exciting game. As for Detroit, huge disappointment. Dan Campbell. I mean, Ben Johnson has already gone to Chicago. We'll discuss about him. But 12 men on the field on fourth down, you couldn't call a timeout in that situation. And on top of that, Jared Goff with them turnovers. And Ben Johnson, what were you thinking on that trick play with Jameson Williams throwing the football? Okay, I get Jared Goff with them turnovers, but why would you let your wide receiver throw the football? Unless you told me that Jameson Williams was actually trying to run it, kind of like how he did on the reverse for the touchdown, in which Teddy Bridgewater handed it off to him. Why would you do that in that type of situation? But I give a lot of credit to Washington. Dan Quinn, definitely in the conversation for Coach of the Year. Cliff Kingsbury, offensive genius, and he's shown it time and time. Dan Quinn doesn't play not to lose, goes for it on fourth down. I am concerned about the rushing component, champ, because if you look at Washington's defense, they're 30th in the NFL as far as stopping the run, and they gave up 201 yards to Detroit's offense as far as rushing. But still in all, first time since 1991 they advanced an NFC Championship game, man. What were your thoughts about the game? And another question, is this the best rookie season we have ever seen? Because even CJ Stroud had a hell of a rookie season last year, has even confirmed that Jaden Daniels is having the best rookie season ever. What's your thoughts?
First, I will have to say this. With Cliff Kingsbury being the offensive guru around this offense and how far he's been able to take a coachable quarterback, is there any indictment on Kyler Murray at this point?
Sad to say, yes, because remember, the Cardinals, when they handed Kyler Murray that contract, they put a homework clause.
Yeah. So, and people were saying was blaming Cliff Kingsbury about the collapse that was going on. And for how the first half of the season you get started, hot, and then the second half you got cooled down. But it seems like this year it started off, it eased up just a little bit because the league kind of caught up with what they was doing, and then it skyrocketed once again. So you got to ask yourself, is that further an indictment now that Cliff Kingsbury has a very, very cooperative and coachable quarterback? Is that a further indictment on Kyler Murray?
Even though Jaden Daniels is a rookie, but when you look at Kyler Murray, he has that type of potential because his first 3 years in the NFL, he started off well, particularly in year 3 when he was the runaway favorite for the first half of the season for the MVP, and then he cooled off. So you can make that argument.
Yeah. Hey, but hey, calls to show you that Cliff Kingsbury can coach. But I digress on that. Is it the best rookie season ever? I would have to say yes. Look, he didn't come in with a hell of a lot of weapons. We understand Scary Terry and Zach Ertz, not to mention the two-back system that you guys have. But he didn't come in with a hell of a offensive line. He didn't come in, although they have good defensive players and Bobby Wagner, just to name a few on that team. Montez Sweat, gone. Chase Daniels, excuse me.
Chase Young.
Chase Daniels.
Chase Young.
Chase Young, excuse me. I'm saying Chase Daniels. I apologize.
It's okay.
Chase Young, gone. Jonathan Allen, hurt. So Deron Payne, Bobby Wagner, Lattimore, a few key players. Not
Dorrance
exactly.
Armstrong.
Yes, the Armstrong. A few key players here and there, but not that stifling defense that you are really hoping that's going to shut someone down. They will give up a few big plays here and there. In fact, when you think about the rookie seasons that rookies have reached the NFC Championship, when you think about Sean King, you think about that vaulted defense of the Tampa Bay Bucks and how he was able to build them out, and now they was able to build him out of certain situations. You think about Mark Sanchez, you think about that stifling defense that he had. When you think about almost any rookie that made it to the NFC Championship, you always think about their defenses and their weapons first.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Sanchez, Sean King, Joe Flacco, Ben Roethlisberger. Those are the 4 that come to mind. All of them came in with stifling defenses, a good running game, and hellified coaching. When you think about what they came in with during this season, the jury was out on Cliff Kingsbury, like I said it earlier, because of how things turned out in Arizona. The jury was out on Dan Quinn with not only 28-3, which he suffered with my Atlanta Falcons, but with how sometimes the defense would go up and down in Dallas. And, sad to say, the jury was out on Jaden Daniels because of his size. He's not exactly the biggest guy in the room when you walk in. He's not exactly Josh Allen's size or Lamar Jackson's size and height. He's a little guy. He's not that big.
He's 6'4".
So, you're 6'4"?
He's 6'4", but barely over 200. He's like the NFL version of KD, Kevin Durant. Tall, lanky.
Yeah, so it was just a question on if he was going to be able to sustain that punishment at the NFL level. So the jury was out on a lot of the things. Not to mention there was still, after last year, there was still that stink a little bit on the Dan Snyder regime.
Right.
So there was a lot, and sad to say this again, there was a little bit of a jury being out on Magic Johnson and Josh Harris. Remember, in an interview with Ben Johnson, who's now at the Chicago Bears, he didn't want to go to Washington because Magic Johnson and Josh Harris were quote-unquote basketball guys. So the jury was out on a lot of things around that organization. So he didn't come into a situation like, having a Joe Gibbs and a plethora full of weapons, having some hogs as far as some offensive linemen that was just going to come out and just show out. This was an organization built from scratch. So when you think about the fact that And this team went, and a lot of these players were there last year with Sam Howell, and the team only won a handful of games. So when you think about that big of a turnaround in just 1 year, and you're not only going to the NFC Championship, you are playing against a team that you legitimately beat before when they was at full health with all of their weapons.
Mm-hmm.
You beat them you beat them during the regular season with all of their weapons. And the fact that Jayden Daniels has been very, very poised. He has been very, very comfortable in his environment. I mean, if you talk to anybody in that locker room, in that organization, they say nobody works as hard as he does. You have to say it's Jayden Daniels. He didn't have a stifling defense coming in. He didn't have a lot of the things that a lot of these rookie players come in. He didn't even have as much as the guy who was drafted before him, Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and Caleb Williams, he got loaded with offense. Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore. And he had a lot of offensive. Sorry to steal your thunder, Chip. He had a lot of offensive fire. With Jayden Daniels in the meantime, he had, Terry McLaurin, Brian Robinson Jr., who had durability problems, Austin Eckler, who I like, who's had durability problems himself. But I've told you about that offensive line. But thank God it's not as bad as Chicago's offensive line. I will say that in that regard. But Washington, they had to start from scratch. I mean, you had to go from McDonald's to now all of a sudden a 5-star restaurant. That's how much. I mean, you had to go from chitlins and pig's feet to now steak and lobster. That's how far Washington has come, because you went from moribund to atrocious to now all of a sudden legitimate. And you're only steps away. As you mentioned, we are a few hogs away from offense. Now, we do need some help with the DB position. I would love to see them draft a cornerback so that Marshawn Lattimore can help them out. We definitely got to stop the run defense, because especially if we're going up against a guy like Saquon Barkley. But I do think Washington has potential. I don't think it's a fluke or an aberration. I think people need to pay more attention to Washington, because this is not Dan Snyder running the show anymore. This is a new organization with Josh Harris and Magic Johnson. And one thing we know of Magic, anything he touches turns to gold. And he's not going to tolerate a bunch of nonsense. And I'm glad for Jonathan Allen too, because last year he talked about how he was tired of losing. Well, that ain't the case anymore. Washington is actually winning. Washington is actually doing something. And the beauty of it, champ, they didn't win the division. You don't know if Philadelphia is going to win that division next year, because if you look at it historically, when is it that a team in that division won it back-to-back years? You got to go back to the early 2000s with the Eagles, with Andy Reid as the head coach. And when you look at Dallas, I'm sorry, Jerry Jones running the show. And by the way, champ, speaking of the Cowboys, don't you find it pretty ironic? The Eagles, the Giants, and now the Washington Commanders have recently been to a conference championship game, and Dallas hasn't even been to one since the year they won the Super Bowl in '95.
I find it quite ironic, but it doesn't surprise me. Look, when you have good ownership and you got good general managers, and like Magic Johnson said, big shout out to Magic Johnson.
Thank you.
You put guys in place, and every owner realizes this. Step out the way. Let them do their job. Jerry Reinsdorf said this. I mean, from the great owner from the Chicago Bulls, he said this about Jerry Krause. It was like, well, why do you let things happen between Jerry Krause and your team? And he said to himself, the only job that I have as an owner, is to put people in certain places so they can be successful, get out of the way, and let them get their jobs done. I don't know anything about the subject that they're talking about. And that's how a lot of things should, and that's how things should be in the NFL. With Jerry, he wants to be out front. He wants to be in the spotlight. And guess what? You're not going to get very, very far in that line of work. And these coaches that are trying to get these next crop of good coaches that are now becoming that have, that were offensive coordinator like Ben Johnson, like Aaron Glenn, like, Leslie Frazier, guys like that. They're not trying to come to Dallas and butt heads with Jerry Jones. They're not.
They're their own
And I
man.
don't blame them.
Yeah, who wants it? I mean, look, I've said it before, champ. Mike McCarthy, even though he's a Super Bowl champion, but I've said this before, even though I respectfully disagree with Flash, he a product of Favre and Rodgers. Because other than that, what has he really done? I mean, the clock management issues, the leadership. I will give McCarthy this though. In 2023, we saw the best of Dak Prescott.
Yes,
That was the year Dak Prescott was the runner-up for the MVP, led the NFL in touchdown passes, having a bounce-back year because the year before, he and Davis Mills of the Houston Texans, they were tied for the most interceptions the year before. And Dak Prescott had a big bounce-back year. But with Jerry, and I know we're digressing a little bit, he will continuously hire yes men. And which is why, champ, I would not be surprised nor shocked at all he hires Brandon Staley. Because there's no chance he's going to hire Prime. You really think Prime is actually going to coach the Dallas Cowboys? Prime is his own man. If you're going to give Prime an opportunity, let him do his job the way he sees fit. But that's not the case with the Dallas Cowboys. Thank God Stephen Jones is there because he's the only person that could get into Jerry's ear. After all, this is the same Stephen Jones that talked Jerry out of drafting Johnny Manziel.
Sad, tragic even. It's tragic even. But yeah, that's the reason. The thing is, what's so funny about the Cowboys at this point is it's funny when you think about this. They had a 2-decade head start on y'all. When Dan Snyder bought the team. They had a 2-year head start on y'all. 2-decade head start on y'all. They still ain't won to the NFC Championship. How do you get a 2-decade head start on a team? Because if you remember back then in the early 2000s, Washington wasn't doing so good.
Only managed to win 2 playoff games under Snyder's stewardship.
And even after they brought Joe Gibbs back. Even after they bought the Super Bowl winning head coach back, they still wasn't able. So you had a 2-decade head start on the team, and you still wasn't able to not get caught. You still got caught up with futility, mediocrity, just being good enough. Hey, gotta ask yourself some questions. What do I need to change?
It's too late for Jerry at this point. Because when you reach a certain point in age, what's the likelihood of you changing? Jerry's still going to collect his money. Dallas Cowboys is still America's team. It's still the most lucrative, profitable team, not just in the NFL, but in sports. So Jerry's still going to make his money. But at the same time, Jerry, you want to see a Super Bowl. But if you want to win that Super Bowl, why don't you hire a head coach that you're going to allow to do the job? Problem is, Jerry's too heavily invested on his team. He's not only the owner, he's the GM, team president. Think about this, champ. He is doing press conferences right after the team loses. Normally, you would expect the coach or the players to do the press conferences after the game. He does it front and center. Unlike most owners, Jerry has his own show. I mean, it's like therapy for Jerry because you actually hear whatever Jerry Jones has to say, even though how crazy it is. But look, thank God that's not the case with Washington. Magic understands what Magic is a champion himself. Magic knows knows how to win, what it takes to win, the requirements to win. After all, he learned from, of course, your great owner, the late great Dr. Jerry Buss. God rest his soul. Yeah. Jerry Buss stayed out of the way, and Magic understands that. And Magic knows what it takes because not just the success with the Commanders so far. Look at what he's done for the LA Dodgers. Look at what he's done. And also the city of Los Angeles, the Starbucks, the Magic Johnson movie theaters, the Burger Kings, the fitness centers. When Magic touches something, you expect something great to happen. And it's surprising to me, champ, with Washington, they're able to come this far And this is really like what year 1, year 2 of this ownership. So that's just telling you how much how much how great it's going to be as long as we protect Jaden Daniels. But to Detroit, what do you say about this loss?
Oh man, this might be the beginning of the downfall. It might just be. You just lost the game in a bad fashion. Now you just lost your genius offensive coordinator. That's number one. And if you don't believe that an offensive coordinator has impact on what your team can do, look how badly the Atlanta Falcons went down after Kyle Shanahan left. You had Steve Sarkisian, who was there for like a couple years, but it was never the same high-powered offense as it was. Look at that impact within itself. I mean, if you don't believe an offensive coordinator has that type of greatness and he can bring the best out of them, look at that as a prime example. That offense for the Atlanta Falcons was never the same. So I know that we made the playoffs the year after that, but it was never as crisp as it was. If you don't believe how good an offensive coordinator can make a player, look at what Lamar Jackson did this year. Although he had a lackluster playoff game, look at what he did for him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think the only quarterback that is exempt from that is Patrick Mahomes. Because remember when he lost Eric Bieniemy, his play didn't suffer as much.
Yeah.
So
yeah, Matt Nagy.
Yeah, he had Matt Nagy. So, and he was still putting up numbers. He's not putting up those numbers this year, but, he's still Patrick Mahomes. So that's how much of it. And then you're probably about to lose your emotional leader on defense in Aaron Glenn. He may be very well going to the New York Jets,
where he used to play.
Yep. So you're about to lose two key pieces. And look, remember what happened to the Philadelphia Eagles when they lost two key pieces on their offense and their defensive side of the ball? When they lost Shane Steichen and the defensive coordinator, he went down to Arizona. Remember how horrible that team looked just last year?
Yeah.
They started off 11-0 and then down the stretch, poof. So that's how much of an impact that an offense and a defensive coordinator has, especially when you have an emotional leader like an Aaron Glenn in that locker room. So this might be the beginning of the downfall. Now, as long as they have Dan Campbell, do I expect them to be good? Yes. But you are for sure, unless you go and get Steve Wilks or Robert Saleh in order to replace Aaron Glenn and then turn back around and perform some miracle in order to get another hot shot offensive coordinator, that is definitely going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem in the coming years. Plus,
go ahead, champ. No, go ahead, champ.
Plus, attrition starts to kick in because now, in a few years, you got to pay Aiden Hutchinson. In a few years, you have to pay Jameson Williams. In another few years, you have to pay Jahmyr Gibbs. And in another few years, you have to bring that entire defensive side of the ball back. So attrition, you losing your offense and your defensive coordinators, and, not to mention injuries caught up with you this year as well. So you got to take all of that into consideration at this point. So this might be the beginning of it's not the beginning of the end of them being good. I believe they're going to be good as long as Dan Campbell is there. As long as he's there, I think they got a chance. But the dominance that team had over the course of the last few years, especially during the regular season, I don't think that's going to be there at least for the first year after. If they're to lose Aaron Glenn as well this year, I don't think that dominance is going to be there because you've already lost the key piece in that offensive coordinator. You've already lost a key piece in that defensive, and if you lose that emotional leader on the defensive side of the ball as well, it might very well be the beginning of the end of the dominance in this organization.
Not to mention, champ, when you look at the NFC North, I mean, Green Bay, even though they've had their share of injuries, we still can't discount them. We still can't discount Matt LaFleur. Then you
Mhm.
look at the Minnesota Vikings, the job that Kevin O'Connell did, although they struggled in that game against the Los Angeles Rams, we can't discount them. In Chicago, now with Ben Johnson, and we'll talk about that later, it's not going to be easy for Detroit. And especially, I didn't even mention the rest of the NFC because you still got Philadelphia, you got Washington if they continue to improve. And we can't forget the Rams. We can't forget San Francisco. San Francisco, to me, they had a down year because, of course, Super Bowl hangover and, of course, injuries, things of that nature. But I do believe that they will be better. And for 49ers fans to actually think, well, firing Kyle Shanahan would be the solution, then to be honest with you, you are just, I don't know what to say. Well, I'll let you say it, champ.
You can ship him right on back down here to Atlanta, and we will be glad to take him off your hands. We won't even mention 28-3, not there another time. So I'm just gonna be real. Kyle Shanahan is one hell of a coach, man. And regardless of poor clock management, whatever you want to call it, whenever a coach keep you in contention every year like that, especially with these core players, with the salary cap and everything like that, it's been it's nothing short of amazing. And the only reason why they weren't competitive this year is because, again, injuries caught up with them.
Yes, of
That
course.
was it.
Brandon Staley. I'm sorry. Brandon Ayuk with that injury. That was huge. And then, of course, you mentioned with Debo Samuel, Manos de Piedra.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if there is one offensive coordinator that any team should look at, is the offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you look at the job that he did with Baker Mayfield to have another back-to-back 4,000-yard season, Baker was up there with 40-plus touchdown passes, and to help the Bucs win the division. And look, Baker Mayfield, say whatever you want about Baker Mayfield. I think he is a top 10 quarterback, and he's played like it the past couple of seasons to have this type of performance. Liam Cohen of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he should be considered for another offensive coordinator job or head coaching job. Heck, it doesn't surprise me because of how much of an impact the offensive coordinators have. Look at what he did with Baker Mayfield. If Detroit, if you're looking for an offensive coordinator, they want to look at him. Just saying.
Hey, and Eric Bieniemy just got let go from UCLA. Hey, his offensive mind, regardless of what you may think, is no joke. So you're looking to replace. You can replace one great offensive mind with another.
He needs
So
to run the football more, though. That was the thing you
yes,
told me about in Washington. I think he was too more interested in trying to show people he deserving of a job and that he was more of Andy Reid. But
yeah.
EB, back as an offensive coordinator, as long as he knows how to utilize things, I think he should have a shot.